Welcome to the 21st Women's Congress. It is a pleasure to be with you, and it is not so much of a pleasure to be in this time, I know, of so many wars raging and so much lack of consciousness. Um, I, as many of you know, was a child refugee from the Holocaust, from the Nazis. And that experience uh, really is the root of my work, to see whether it's true that we don't have an alternative to what I later called a domination system. Um, and my answer to that question of whether we do or don't have an alternative was a resounding yes, we have an alternative. And that is the alternative that I called a partnership systems. So I introduced, as many of you know, the partnership domination social scale, because it's always a matter of degree. But our job, and it's a very difficult job in one way, but in another way, it's rather simple. Uh, it's to show that we do have this alternative, and that in fact, uh, there are many movements in the last 300 years to which the regression to domination that we're in the midst of is a reaction, actually, all the way from the Enlightenment movement challenging the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule, the feminist movement challenging the so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule over the women and children in the quote castles, military metaphor of their homes, the so-called divinely, because all these movements challenged the same thing, domination, the right, uh, again, divinely ordained right of a quote superior race to rule over an inferior race, the peace movement challenging the use of violence, the social equity and economic equity movements challenging this gap between haves and have-nots, all the way to the environmental movement challenging again the so-called divinely ordained right of men, uh, and I think they really meant men and man, to rule over our mother earth, to exploit and to extract. Now, that is not adaptive, my friends. And we have to show people, number one, that there is a partnership alternative, that it lasted for millennia in our prehistory, that it is resurging. Look at Ireland, it changed almost overnight. Look at the Nordic nations, Finland, always at the top of, the happiness reports. Uh, it's better. It's better. And yes, it includes how we are brought up in our families, in our very early childhood. It includes gender, no longer thinking of violence. I mean, we are full of these programs, these games, these epics, idealizing the hero as killer. Let's call it what it is. Uh, we have to change consciousness, starting with the consciousness of people who think of themselves as progressives, but who have a completely fragmented consciousness. They don't connect the dots. They don't include gender. They don't include childhood, despite neuroscience showing that really we are not born with fully formed brains, and our brains develop in interaction with our environment, which for most children is their families. So we had a wonderful virtual summit attended by over 2,000 people worldwide, registered, called Peace Begins at Home. And I know that the work that you're doing is so very important to bring in the female half of humanity into the mainstream, which we're doing, but in bits and pieces. And unfortunately, as you know, we see women also internalizing this domination system. And really, it is first we need to change our own consciousness and see that all of these movements are and have been against domination. It's one movement. It's a movement from domination to partnership. Focus on the four cornerstones, starting with family and childhood. Gender. Gender is not just a women's issue. Gender is a primary principle, an organizing principle for families, for economics, for societies. Economics, we need to move to a caring. Yeah, care is associated with women and devalued, excluded, basically. It's an externality. And we got to change that. And of course, story and language. I'm quite ancient by now, and I want to, for my children, for my grandchildren, for our children and grandchildren, are they going to have a future? It depends on our consciousness, and it depends on what we do. So let's do it for ourselves, for our children, and for generations still to come. I thank you.